Hello, it's John Heaton. I'm going to do a video about this exciting new tape which Mark Lewison has discovered. Before I do that, I just want to tell you I've got this book now from Adrian Allen and a review of that coming up. I'm not sure if I'm going to do the review before I finished it. I'm about halfway through, but a lot of good things to say about this, but that's coming up. So back to the subject in hand. So, as probably most of you have heard, one way or another, Mark Lewison has got hold of a tape recorded on the 8th of September 1969 at 3 Savile Row, Apple. Ringo was in hospital having his intestinal problems seen to, and George, Paul and John convened at Apple. John brought along a portable tape recorder, pressed record and said, "Ringo, you're not here, but we wanted you to be able to hear what we're discussing." And then they promptly discussed ideas for a follow-up album to Abbey Road. So it flies in the face of conventional thought, and particularly with hindsight. Most of the Beatles, or at least George and John, were saying that, yeah, Abbey Road was the end and we all knew it. I think if you listen to contemporary interviews at the time, it was a lot more fluid than that. It was not one day or one month where they suddenly decided to go their separate ways, and they certainly weren't aware consciously that Abbey Road was their last work, and this tape kind of proves it. So Mark Lewison is doing a tour of Britain, and he's doing a tour about the Abbey Road album, and he's including this tape as part of the tour, so you have to pay, I think it's between £22 and £30 to see the show. It's probably worth going, but I'm just wondering why he got the right to use it and why it's not in the public domain. Why don't they just release it commercially and people could have it immediately, because people are dying to hear this tape. Because it is very interesting to hear them talking about making more Beatle music after Abbey Road. So Mark Lewison says, but I think this is to try and help sell his tour, this pretty much rewrites everything we knew about the Beatles. Well, it may rewrite what a lot of people thought about the Beatles, but it certainly doesn't rewrite what Mark Lewison knew or knows, or us big fans, because this book by Anthony Fawcett, One Day at a Time, which came out in 1975. Anthony Fawcett was John Lennon's personal assistant throughout the late 60s and early 70s. And there's a chapter here called The Breakup of the Beatles. And I don't know whether Anthony Fawcett has got hold of this tape, or whether he was in the room when the Beatles were discussing this, or whether he chatted to John, you know, that the evening after, the evening of the conversation. But he's quoting quite a few Beatles conversations from the autumn of '69. Things like John saying, "I didn't have the energy or the nervous type of thing to push it, you know, so I relaxed a bit. Nobody else relaxed. You didn't relax in that way, so gradually I was submerging," referring to the fact that Paul was more pushy and would push to have the A-side of a single and would push ideas like Magical Mystery Tour onto him. Paul, upset and a little taken aback, agreed that he had come out stronger, but he reminded John that there had been times when he had tried hard to include John's work, only to be dismayed because he was not prepared and had only written 1 or 2 songs. John acknowledged that he had given up writing as well as fighting, and explained there was no point in turning him out. I didn't have the energy to turn him out and get him on as well. They could talk about it forever, but it was too late. John had already decided, and he gave Paul his ultimatum. When we get into the studio, I don't care how we do it, but I don't want to think about equal time. I just want it known that I'm allowed to put 4 songs on the album, whatever happens. I don't have to say, shall we do it now? Because I think we'll all get fed up in 3 weeks, or actually the album will be full. Because actually we did 2 of Paul's last week, or 1 of Ringo's, or 1 of George's, whatever, and well, it's too late now. Next album. So that's pretty similar to so on the Mark Lewison tape, if I can call it that, John is proposing that John has 4 tracks, George has 4 tracks, and Paul has 4 tracks. And and Ringo has 2 if he wants them. So John, in this brilliant chapter of this book, John continues, I've discovered how I am and I've got to stop it because it does me no good, you know. I'm always bitter afterwards and it's nobody's fault except my own. So now I'm saying no more ideas on me or whatever, no more finished product. I don't want to be approached like that, you know, because there must be other ways of doing it because I'm going to say no to everything. Wasted words because the Beatles never again went into a recording studio. So then later on, I think this is the conversation which Mark Lewison has stumbled upon. By the way, it's great news that it exists on tape. It's one thing to read transcripts of it in a book, but to actually hear it on tape is going to lend a lot of weight to it. John, Paul and George discussed this problem at Apple in the autumn of '69 on one of the rare occasions when they got together. John glared at Paul and said sarcastically, it seemed mad for us to put a song on an album that nobody really dug, including the guy who wrote it, just because it was going to be popular, because the LP doesn't have to be like that. Wouldn't it be better, because we didn't really dig them, you know, for you to do the songs you dug and Obla D and Maxwell to be given to people who like music like that, you know, like Mary Hopkin or whoever it is needs a song. Why don't you give them to them? The only time we need anything vaguely near that quality is for a single. For an album we could only do stuff that we really dug. And then the bit about so then we carved up the singles between us, he told Paul. We have the singles market. They, George and Ringo, don't get anything. I mean, we've never offered George B-sides, and we could have given him a lot of B-sides. But because we were 2 people, you had the A-side and I had the B-side. Well, the thing is, Paul answered, without even looking at George, who sat a few feet away, I think that until now, until this year, brackets '69, our songs have been better than George's. Now, this year, his songs are at least as good as ours. George was quick to correct Paul. No, that's a myth, because most of the songs this year I wrote about last year or the year before anyway. Maybe now I just don't care whether you're going to like them or not. I just do them. If I didn't get a break, I wouldn't push it. I just forget about it. Now for the last 2 years at any rate, I've pushed it a bit more. I know what he's saying, John said, because people have said to me you're coming on through a lot stronger than you had. I don't particularly seek acclaim, George said. That's not the thing. It's just to get out whatever it is there, to make way for whatever else is there, you know? Because it's only to get them out, and also I might as well earn a bit of money, seeing as I'm spending as much as the rest of you and I don't earn as much as the rest of you. Like the others, George was now on his own musically. Most of my tunes, he said, I never had the Beatles backing me. Oh, come on, George, John shouted. We put a lot of work in your songs, even down to Don't Bother Me. We spent a lot of time doing all that and we grooved. I can remember the riff you were playing, and in the last 2 years there was a period when you went Indian and we weren't needed. That was only one tune, George said. On the last album, brackets White Album, I don't think you appeared on any of my songs. I don't mind. Well, you had Eric, or someone like that, John replied in a hurt tone of voice. There was a long pause as each Beatle seemed lost in contemplation, wondering, not wanting to admit that they were becoming individual musicians. Paul grasped at the remnants of truth and spoke slowly, almost whispering, when we get in a studio, even on the worst day, I'm still playing bass, Ringo's still drumming, and we're still there, you know. But the drive, the determination, the combined energy and love of the group had gone. Instead of complementing each other, they now antagonized each other, and of course the music suffered. Yes, they were still there, but only barely. It's a very well-written book, and I think Anthony Fawcett, being John's personal assistant, would have, if not had direct access to those meetings, would have, as I say, would have been able to discuss them with John a few hours afterwards and would have got the gist. I'm not sure how he could quote verbatim what each of them said, but it strikes me as pretty close to what Mark Lewison's indicating is on the tape. We've just had snippets come out in The Guardian and various other newspapers. Another thing John says on the tape is we're going to put out a single before Christmas, let each Beatle come in with their ideas for a single, so that's a fascinating thing to contemplate, because of the songs that I think were written at the time, September '69, I don't think My Sweet Lord was written, or maybe it was, just about. That could have been a contender, but then can you imagine My Sweet Lord as a Beatles single? Cold Turkey would have been the song that John proposed, and again, can you imagine that as a Beatles single? In fact, he did offer it to the Beatles and Paul turned it down. Not sure what George or Ringo said. Well, Ringo was playing on the track, as we know, but can you imagine that as a Beatles single? I think Maybe I'm Amazed would probably have won the competition to be put out as the next Beatles song, and that is a fascinating thought, to have a Beatles version of Maybe I'm Amazed come out in the just before Christmas in '69. And another thing John says is, from now on we're not going to use the Lennon-McCartney songwriting credit, because that's a myth. Finally proposing that each song should be credited just to the individual writer. So that would have been certainly would have been a different Beatles album in feel, and you know, one can speculate about what songs would have been on it and whether it would have sounded as cohesive as Abbey Road had done, and whether it would have been a good thing. But it's fascinating that this tape exists, and one just hopes that Mark Lewison or whoever owns the copyright gets it out into the public domain sooner rather than later. So thank you for watching. See you next time.